welcome everybody here from England Lacrosse, and thanks for taking the time to join us. I'm going to pass you very quickly over to Tom to take the lead on this, but just to let people know that we hope that this is going to be the first of sort of several evenings that we look to run over the next month or so to try and give us our lacrosse fix until we can get back on the field. So with that, I'll pass you over to Tom. And again, thanks a lot for joining us. The plan is to actually record the session, and we will put links on via the England Lacrosse social media stuff, so where you can link to it if you want to revisit it, etc. And there will you ask lots of questions. So thank you again for joining, and I'll hand you over to Tom.
Thanks very much, Richard. And I wanted to start off with that with a thank you. Really appreciate you putting this on, Richard, and Jason as well. I think fabulous opportunity, like you say, for us to get a bit of a lacrosse fix, and I perfectly appreciate that we are sort of guinea pigs in something of a new venture from EL perspective. So please bear with us whilst we kind of try and work through this and hopefully give you something interesting, hopefully give you something beneficial and useful. And thank you to you all for joining in and hopefully making it interactive. I think the plan is to show you some video, talk through a particular game that Richard's asked us to break down and have a bit of a look at in a bit more detail. But I think, like all of these things, the benefit really is from your own personal perspective. So there's things you want to look at in more detail, things that you want to ask. The best way of doing that in discussion with Richard is to use the raise your hand function on Teams, and then Richard will jump in at any point and ask questions. And I'm certainly not fussed about being stopped in full flow, so please feel free to ask anything at any point. Just raise your hand and then we'll jump in. I also want to say a big thank you to Baggy and to Sam Patterson. Richard had asked me to have a look at this, and one of the big challenges is that my memory of individual games is awful, and my memory in game is pretty poor. So I'm frequently the last person on the sideline to even know the score of the game. I think that from my perspective, that's almost deliberate. I try to maintain an emotional neutrality, which I find a bit challenging. And so because of that, I kind of almost just go into a bit of a flatline, very, very unemotional state, or certainly try to. And that does impact on my memory post game. But and I'd like to think hopefully makes me more effective in game. But because of that, it's been really beneficial, really useful to be able to bring Sam in, who can bring a player's perspective, and bring Baggy in, who can give a coach's perspective. So I was head coach of the team to give people some background, and Baggy ran the bench in effect, so organised our substitutes. As far as the game itself is concerned, I think there needs to be some context. To analyse any performance in isolation, I think takes away a lot of the relevant information. And the starting point for this one probably comes 4 years earlier, where England had lost in a 1-goal game. I was assistant coach of that team as well. Sam played in that game. Baggy was there watching that game. We were all kind of in different ways involved in that game as well. And we lost to Japan in a 1-goal game in overtime. And the context of this one was that we had to win to maintain our 5th division status. There are a number of key performance indicators that are given to me as head coach, and in an ideal world, it's no great surprise that we would have been pushing for a medal place. That opportunity had been denied, I would argue, possibly by our own performance. I kind of feel that we maybe should and could have got over the line against Australia, which would have taken us potentially towards a bronze medal game. But after that opportunity's gone, and that is the inevitable side of the fast-paced nature of international world championship lacrosse. It's game after game after game. There is absolutely no feeling sorry for yourself. There's absolutely no licking of wounds, or if there is, it's a relatively short period, and you kind of you bounce back, or hopefully bounce back. And we got ourselves to the 5th place game against Japan, as I say, we lost to 4 years ago. And then so in terms of key performance indicators, that's really our baseline position, is that we've been told to finish in the blue division and to beat all the European nations that we played. Those were the parameters that we were working to. And whilst this game didn't necessarily keep us in the blue division, we'd already secured that through previous performances. We obviously wanted to go out on a high. The reason that I think Richard's asked us to look at some video clips from this game in particular, and it's no spoiler alerts, you will have, I'm sure, already seen this, that we went 7-0 down, and we went 7-0 down very, very quickly. Anything I say about why that happened, and I'll certainly ask for Baggy's input, I'll ask for Sam's input and their perspectives. Anything I say will sound like an excuse, because it is an excuse. We certainly let ourselves down, I think, collectively in the way that we prepared for this, and I think that came about in a couple of different stages. So, some background. This is our final game. This is our final game as a team. The way that World Championship Lacrosse usually works, there's very, very unlikely that these 23 players will ever play together again. We are coming into this game from Blue Division competition, where we play against the best in the world, and we kind of go toe-to-toe against the best players in the world, and I guess get a little bit knocked around, a little bit battered. We had a couple of players, certainly Tim Collins played no part in this game through injuries he'd picked up in the tournament, and Japan had come a very different route. They'd had a slightly different schedule. As I say, all of that will sound like an excuse, because it is. That's just there's no surprises there. That's the way that this tournament works. I do think that needs to change. I do think that needs to be looked at. I do think there needs to be some kind of seeding. It is a very tough schedule for some and a very different schedule for others. But the big context to this particular match is the scheduling. Ordinarily, the 5th, 6th place game would take the billing that it deserves, the 5th, 6th place billing. And would therefore be seen as more significant, higher profile than those games for 7th and 8th place and below and so on. But finishing below us for the playoff games were Israel, obviously their home championships, and understandably, and I don't think, well, certainly I didn't personally see any issue with them wanting to make a change. They wanted to make a change to bring their game to a higher billing, an earlier time slot in the day, and I absolutely understand the reason for that. But the inevitable outcome was that we were put right at the end of the day. I can't remember when this faced off, but it was nuts. I mean, it was late. Can you, Baggy, Sam, can you remember when we faced this game off? It was very, very late.
10:40 at night.
Yeah. So 10:40 at night, when most ordinary people are either getting to bed or heading for a post-game beer, we were facing off, and that had undoubtedly, for us as a squad, felt like it had devalued our 4 years of preparation, and that we were kind of almost second-class citizens, just being shunted to the end of a very long day. The information on being changed kind of came through relatively late as well. It's not like we had days and days to prepare and get our heads around it, or we knew right from the get-go that would be the case. We were relatively late. And we had a team meeting to discuss that. We had some conversations between the players. Very much the ethos of us as a coaching staff was to engage the players in some of our decisions. And I'd like to think that we then got ourselves to a reasonably good position. We'd kind of, realigned ourselves, refocused ourselves in terms of it is what it is, control the controllables, the usual language that coaches would have. But a lot of that conversation, a lot of that language actually driven by the players And some of it certainly driven by some of the younger players in our group who are absolutely, come on, this is the last time we'll play together as a 23. This is the last tournament, game of the tournament from our perspective. Let's try and go out with a bang. And other than that, we deliberately didn't change anything. And I think that that's also a really important message from our point of view, is you don't build these games up to be anything special or anything different. You go through your process. And we had a pretty clear and set process from here. So what our pre-game looks like, what our meetings back at the team hotel look like in terms of prep for the game and all that kind of stuff. It's just same old, same old, same old. And you get into that routine for very specific performance reasons. So I'd like to think we've got ourselves to a good state. But I just want to show you a real quick, before we actually even get to the game, I just want to show you a really quick video of the warm-up, or some elements of the warm-up, and then I'll explain why I want to show you this. So this is the Japan team warming up. It's just kind of video before they even start the main broadcast, which is why it's all a bit choppy. You've got us warming up down the other end with the players from the game before still leaving the field or kind of half watching. You've got empty stands because it's 10:40 at night, and the warm-ups are going on as per, kind of shoot around beforehand. But what and the captain's toss in the middle there, what I know certainly had an impact on me, and I'll ask Baggy and Sam their perspectives in a minute. And as I say, it's excuses, and the Japan were in exactly the same position as us, and what's abundantly clear is that they dealt with it far better than us. But at the top of that, still now, you can see the advertising boards are around the field. And having kind of realigned ourselves, look, it is what it is. We're just going to have to play this incredibly late face-off. We are just going to have to accept that there's not going to be many people there. We are going to have to accept that we're going to finish a game the day after we started playing the game. A kind of post-midnight finish. Look, that's just the way it is. And we'd sort of, like I say, I certainly felt that we'd done a reasonable job of having that consistency and getting ourselves back ready to play. We get down there, perimeter boards are all up, the advertising hoardings are all up. They start taking them down as we're warming up. So I show you that video and those stills now because you'll see those perimeter boards there now. You will not see them by the end of the first quarter. So as we're playing the game, as we are warming up to play, having gone through a process of, as I say, trying to realign our expectations, they are literally breaking down the venue. And I know that certainly I personally didn't deal with that well. I felt it was a slight. I felt that it was dismissive of the players. And as a coach, you always end up being really kind of protective of your team and of your players. And I just felt, you know what? Fine, you've shunted us to the end of the day, but the least you could do is let us play in the stadium. No, they kind of were clearing things away and wrapping up equipment and taking things down and all of that kind of stuff. And so, as I say, it's probably excuses because Japan were in the same situation. They maybe had a different route to that game than us, but we're in the same, and we just didn't deal with it well. But Baggy, Sam, your take on that, your take on some of those challenges around the timing of the game and kind of the emotional and mental feelings of being asked to play late. What was your take on that situation?
So I think, like you said, we were faced with that late on, and we did our best back at the hotel and even preparing it in the pre-game. But I think you just hit the nail on the head when they were started to pull the signage down around the field. I think I'm still dealing with it. If I'm honest, I was still talking to Scott Neese about how they could do it because we felt very devalued. But again, it was the perfect lesson for what we as coaches had said all along. We focus on ourselves. We don't focus on anything else around. And I think that was the perfect example of it, was players coming up and saying, what are they doing? They're taking the signs down. We need to focus on us and focus on our game and focus on how we play this game.
Yeah. And Sam, from a player's perspective?
Yeah, my memory of the game, sorry, I'll turn my video on. My memory of the game, energy was pretty good going into the game. I think the warm-ups went pretty well, and I don't remember there being actual on the field being a huge issue between the players. I think we were just ready for going. They definitely shocked us in that first 10 minutes, but Yeah, I think the challenges of the day were quite quite a challenge for the players. We had that meeting in the morning where we were told that we were playing at 11:15 at night. It went round like a lead balloon in the team room. But I think once we got over that initial sort of hurdle, I think it kind of rallied the team. I think as a team, we're a very resilient bunch. I think we showed that numerous times, not only before, not in the tournament, before it as well, where we've come from behind from quite significant scoreline. So from my point of view, the energy was good within the group. I think we were very hungry to play Japan again.
Yeah. And then when the game started, I don't think that we saw anything that we weren't expected. I mean, there's no doubt that we weren't, we didn't perform in the first quarter, but Japan are one of the easier international schemes to scout. We'd actually played Japan in a warm-up game before the tournament in Israel in our training camp. We played them 3 or 4 days before we moved up to Wingate to start the tournament. And they play fast. There's a real identity to the way that they play. They are probably, I think, the best team internationally in managing the transition, for want of a better word, for managing the transition between transition lacrosse and settled offense. They go absolutely a million miles an hour. And if it's not on from a transition point of view, they then settle the ball down really well. They're incredibly disciplined in the way that they play, in that they are very structured, they have a very clear game plan that they all stick to and they all buy into, and they certainly did that here. They I think certainly were fresher than us. I would argue, just because of the schedule that they come into. I think that Japan, certainly from a scouting point of view, are a team who rarely give any kind of obvious weaknesses. They are, look, they're not necessarily the best in the world at individual aspects of the game, or else they'd be competing for gold and for silver. But they are certainly not a team who has a kind of a real obvious hole in what they do. They just do everything well. But like I say, particularly their identity around that fast play, that fast transition. We knew that they would dodge against short sticks. That's the way that they play their offense. We knew that defensively that they would potentially play some zone, which they certainly did. And I mention that now because I feel that is relevant right from the get-go. If we're looking at our approach to this game, and if we're looking at some of the things that we did certainly latterly that eventually got us the win, they come from training environments months and months before this. We had a set way of breaking down a zone. I don't think we were particularly efficient about always executing it, but when we did execute it, we executed it incredibly well in this game. And we planned for that. We prepared for that. And that's, I guess, something that is worthy of note. The depth and breadth of early planning for these games is significant. But I think because of that, we then maybe kind of, because we felt we prepared so well and had really understand what Japan were going to be good at and what we would need to do to counter that and what we were good at, that when we were knocked a little bit off stride with a later face-off time and being told that things were going to change, it kind of almost exacerbated that challenge. There were some specific things that we'd identified in scouting with their goalies in particular. Baggy, was some stuff that you wanted to touch on in terms of how we prepared for this game and some of the things we'd fed into the team?
Yeah, I distinctly remember us talking about when we were having our team meetings back at the hotel and we were watching their previous games and how we'd seen that their goalies were not comfortable with the long pole shooting, and we definitely had a chat with our long stick middies. Sam will probably know more about this as well, where we encouraged them to go forward and take some shots. And I think that was one of the key spark plugs and one of the things that ignited this team was the long stick goals, that their goalies weren't good at picking up on long stick shooting.
We'll certainly show that. And to support what Baggy's saying, I actually went back over our scouting report, and what we were specifically identifying is that we felt that their goalie, in particular their starting goalie or the goalie who plays this game, was following the shooter's hands. So the shooter dropped their hands, that he would drop if hands were lifted, that he would lift, that he would go with them. And that's fine if you're facing short sticks, or potentially fine if you're facing short sticks. But yeah, when long poles are shooting on you, it can make you susceptible. And that's certainly something that we'd looked at and identified. So before we play a few clips, I would be grateful if you just looked at this in with one perspective in mind, is shooting. And look, there's lots of things that we'll analyse, lots of things that we can talk through tonight, but the shooting of England in particular, we focus, I feel, in this country a lot on mechanics, fundamentals. You've got to get the basics right before you can move on. You've got to get your kind of time and room, your hands high and away, follow through, all of those kind of mechanics. And that's just as relevant for the women's game as it is for the men's game. When you actually sit down and watch a game, when you analyse it, and I've got the clips of all of England's goals, the rarity of that type of shot is significant. It doesn't happen often. And therefore, you kind of think, well, why do we practice it so much? So people may then argue, well, you've got to get the basics right before you can get on to the more advanced stuff. But what you'll see within the shooting, both from Japan and from England, is that shooting is never isolated from a decision. It is always coupled with a decision, and it's frequently coupled with more than one decision. Should I shoot or should I not shoot? Should I move towards the goal before I shoot? Should I try and shoot by switching hands? Should I try and take a step in one direction or the other? And that's before you've even, should I put this high? Should I put this low? Should I bounce this? Should I shoot for position? Should I shoot for power? There's so many decisions that go into a shot. And those of us who've played, and I would imagine those of us who coach as well, will know that those decisions are a split second. They're not weighed up in your head. They're not a kind of a conscious pros and cons. Should I do this? Should I do the other? They're instinct. They're gut. They happen milliseconds. And my argument, and I particularly found this watching this game back, is if that is what it looks like in the game, that is what we should be coaching our players. That we should be coaching shooting in the context of rich decision-making environments, putting loads of problems in front of the players. How should I shoot? What type of shot should I do? And move away from that kind of mechanics of absolute fundamental basics. And I'll happily answer questions on that at the end, but I think it's maybe just something to have in the back of your mind as you watch some of these clips. So we'll run through Japan goals. We've not got their first goal, and I don't necessarily intend to kind of go through all of the horror stories of kind of what we're doing and what they're trying to do. A number of them are simply just them dodging on our short sticks as they are there. They're just isolating one player, trying to draw a slide. Frequently, we're slow to go and getting quality shots off. We see them initiating, as I say, against short sticks, so it's not stuff that we were surprised about. They've certainly developed more of an outside shot than they had in previous championships. Not something that we'd necessarily seen from them before, but it's pretty simple stuff. They are a dodge, pass, re-dodge, or a dodge, pass, shoot team. And they have a very simple formula. It works for them. And having developed quality outside shots, quality outside shooters, it's something that works really well for them. But as we play these games, what's it like to be in this position from a player's point of view?
Sorry, Tom, you broke up then. Did you ask me what it was like? Sorry.
Yeah. What's it like? How does it feel from a player's perspective to go in with all these plans, got all these scout reports, like you say, pre-game was good, energy was good, you felt the players kind of switched on and ready to go, and we are 5-0 down before 6 minutes left in the first quarter. What were some of the discussions? What were some of the thought processes, feelings of the players?
I think Mike Tyson said it. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, and I think Japan definitely punches in the face in the first 5 minutes or 6 minutes of the game. From our point of view, we scouted this pre-game. We knew that there were going to be a predominantly low wing dodges or high to low wing dodges on the shorties, and they did that. They isolated really, really well. I think you definitely, to go 6 down. We'd been there before against Ireland, or maybe not 6, but we certainly went a number of goals down. So it's not something that we were unfamiliar to, I don't think. So there definitely wasn't panic. I remember that certainly. There was definitely no panic, but I definitely remember the wind being knocked out of our sails. And we've got some really strong leaders on the field as well. So, guys both in defence and offence that can sort of, put a rocket up people's backsides when needed. And I think definitely there was some conversations had in that first time out.
Can I pick up on something you said there, Sam, about there was no panic, and maybe link that to something that I said about don't look at games in isolation. I've been part of the England setup as long as you have, Sam. We've been around for a while, and I've been in England teams before now where I think that there maybe would have been a bit of sniping, a bit of backbiting. There perhaps would have been a little bit of dejection and kind of same old. But there wasn't with this group. It did feel like there was resilience to us, and obviously that is something that we specifically worked on. But where do you feel that came from, and how did that perhaps differ from, because it would be very easy to go 6-0 down and kind of heads drop, 7-0 down, heads drop, and all of that. What did differ, and what had happened to make that difference with this team?
I could talk for the defence. Obviously, offensively, it's slightly different. I think a mix of personalities in our defence and older heads. There's quite a few senior heads in that defence. You've got Baxter back there, played in 3 World Championships. Jack Bath, 3 World Championships. Tommy, he's played in 3, one for Scotland, but he's played in 3. You've got 3 really senior, like myself. You got 3, and obviously got Brooksy as well. Obviously, he's not played in a World Championship before, but he's supremely experienced, and he's definitely a leader. So you've got 3 really, some really good experience back there. But I think for me, it was the mix of personalities. I don't think there was someone in there. I mean, you got guys that like, barking commands, but not in a way that's going to rile other people up. And I think the way that the goals were scored, they weren't like necessarily individual errors. I think for the most part they were more team errors we just didn't start fast, and we didn't play as a team defense. We didn't slide when we should have slid, or we kind of which we shouldn't have done. Players were playing in isolation, which as a defence we always play as a unit of 7 and never as individuals. So I think that kind of helped as a kind of I think a multitude of factors. I think would have been the reason why we didn't sort of implode defensively, certainly.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Sam, and I'll add to that something that I had learned as a head coach. You've got a balancing act when it comes to selection and your timing of selection. That the later you leave it, the more you can pick the players who are in form, the more you can keep a bigger squad together to have competition for places, and everybody kind of pushing hard and really trying to fight to be selected. And I can see benefits to that. We'd made a different decision with this group. We'd made a decision to select earlier, to spend time working on things like this, on mental resilience, mental strength, on those team dynamics, understanding each other. We certainly had a pretty clear process after every goal that the defence came together and discussed that goal. You've obviously not got long until the face, but they just come together. What happened? What do we need to do differently? And a conversation that maybe lasts for 10 seconds. And so that process has been practiced, if that makes sense, is that you are practicing how to deal with these situations. And then having been able to select, broadly speaking, a an early squad, whilst it wasn't exactly the final 23, the vast majority of these players had been out for a tour to Israel in the April before the tournament started. And that was 1-goal games, that was tight tournament style play, game, day after day after day, against Israel, who obviously are very closely matched in terms of ability, and we'd beaten them in every one. And I think there was a feeling in this group that we'd learned how to win. And whilst we should never have been in this situation, and the fact that we were in this situation, I think, is, you know, that kind of stereotypical, well, it's 50-50. It's down to the way that Japan played. Phenomenal. Did what they did unbelievably well. And 50% us just not performing, just didn't get to the level that we should have been at. But there was no panic. We had been there before in previous games. We were kind of hardened in the furnace of competition, and we'd certainly been in similar situations in previous games in this tournament. Your take on it, Baggy, what was it like managing the bench at this point? Any specific memories of kind of getting ourselves to 6-7 down?
The bench was interesting, and it's also a great place to be because you can micromanage. You can talk to players as they're coming on and off. As you and I both know, Tom, shouting commands onto the field, they don't get heard. You know, it's talking to players as they're coming off the field. It's talking to players as we're doing the substitutions or in between goals. And it was that whole mentality of 1 goal at a time. Just get back in. And I think, as Sam said, we played a very similar game against Ireland, who, again, didn't have strength of schedule compared to us. And they came out and we found ourselves 6 goals behind them. And it was almost this team needed to find themselves in a game before they started playing their best game. And I think that was the thing on the bench, was just the energy, every goal. And I used Tom Brook as an example here. When he scored the long pole goal the first game, it wasn't an unfamiliar thing for the whole team to see, because he'd done a similar thing against Princeton when we played them in Lisbon, and he'd done it the same against other teams previously in the tournament.
And there we go. That's the first goal. We'll maybe look at that a couple of times, but that's what you're talking about, isn't it, Baggy? There's a special energy to long pole scoring. There is something about it, and it is something, as you mentioned before, we had scouted and been aware of, but also something I think that we were pretty clear of in our coaching process, that we had said that in terms of transition, we wanted the first 3 players to go regardless of who they were. And if that ended up being 3 poles, well, so be it. Yeah. That we trusted all of them, and in particular Tom Brook. And that I would like to think, therefore, kind of mutual trust between coaches and players. They had the green light to do things, to try things, to give it a whirl. And then I would say, from my perspective, that the challenge there is that a lot of ownership was given to the players. My coaching philosophy, my coaching beliefs is that they're the ones that are on the field. I totally agree with your point, Baggy. Shouting stuff onto the field of play in the middle of a game. One, if I wanted to do that, I'd play Xbox. You know, if I wanted to move people around like chess pieces or FIFA players, I'd jump on the Xbox and do it. I've got no interest in that, but I just don't think it's effective. People are emotional. People are, physically putting the graft in. You're not in a receptive frame of mind to take specific instruction. And then I think your point's an absolutely valid one, that you then focus on having quiet words with players on the bench, and doing that in an environment that's far more conducive to your message getting across. So I think with that in mind, it's probably a bit disappointing for most people to hear that in terms of 7-0, 7-1 down as we are now, nothing special was said. No special timeout was called. I don't remember me saying anything, certainly. I don't really particularly remember anybody saying anything other than, we've been here before, 1 goal at a time, just keep playing, You know, is that your memory, Baggy? Is that your memory, Sam? I certainly don't. There's certainly no Churchillian speeches going on. That's for sure.
There wasn't any rocket science, that's for sure. It was nothing new to us because we'd faced this situation literally 24 hours, 36 hours before. And from my memory, it was just a case of one goal at a time. And the next thing you know, we found ourselves back in the game.
Yeah. Sorry, Sam, go on.
I was going to say, just in this period, I know obviously the camera's a bit jumping, you can't really see it. But I think after we went 7 goals down, I think Moz is on the call, so he'll probably tell you that we lost every. I think I'm right in saying this, Moz. We lost every single face-off before that one that Brooksy won there, or he came down with, or the first one he came down with. But from my point of view, we definitely were having conversations on the sideline about what to do, because this face-off guy, he'd come into this. Both of them had come into this game over 50%. Particularly the one that was number 21. He was 60% odd. So, a really proficient face-off guy, as Japan always are. They've always got phenomenal face-off guys. And we were talking on the sideline about, especially someone like Brooksy, he might have a long stick in his hand, but he's probably one of our best offensive players. So, if he's, especially he's right-handed as well. So from my point of view, I think I was on that one of the wings, and one of them, it was just clear the guy through, let Brooksy get a righty channel to go down and do what he does best. So I think we were definitely having conversations on the sideline as a face-off unit in terms of how do we turn this around, especially against this, really strong face-off unit. Yeah, I think Brooksy brings the first one down, doesn't he? It's a fast break.
Tom, we've got a question actually. Kate asked, what was the chat like between the coaches on the sideline? Did you discuss taking time out on anything related to it?
We discussed something. We'd made a decision by this point, which I'll ask Baggy to talk about in a bit more detail. We thought that something needed to change, and we decided to change the goalkeeper. That's not a decision that you ever make easily or make quickly. And in this particular case, certainly from my perspective, was not a decision that we made because we felt that one goalkeeper would be better than another. It was almost, we've got to change something. What do we change to try and ignite things? Now, as Sam had talked about, from our perspective as coaches, we'd spent a lot of time giving ownership to the players and empowering the players to make their own decisions, to have their own conversations. And Eddie Jones talks within England Rugby that when it gets to game day, he sees his role as being largely redundant. And I think that in an ideal world, that is what I would aspire to work towards. That the players are the one over the line, and kind of you've got enough of them stood on the sideline as well, watching the game, of kind of feeding things back to each other. And what Sam's just described is just gold dust from my point of view. Players seeing things from the game, making decisions, and then enacting interventions, improvements, changes to boost those. But from a coach's point of view, Baggy, because of his experience and relationship with the goalkeepers, was part of that conversation about what we did. And then Ben, obviously, as our goalkeeper coach, ultimately having those conversations. And that is something that we did discuss and then enact. The other thing I can certainly remember from my point of view is I needed to be very careful about how I managed my emotions. And I'm always careful about that in games. I don't ever want to be seen as being too high, and I don't ever want to be seen as being too low, not least because this game is a case in point. Lacrosse is a game of runs. And, you can come back if you have the right mental mindset, if you have the right focus and approach to the game. So the major decision we'd made at this point, so, kind of a couple of minutes before this particular goal by Tom Brook, was to change the goalkeepers. And Baggy, the process that we went through to do that, the discussions that we had, you obviously don't have long at quarter time. What's your memory of that decision making?
So I give Ben McAllister a lot of credit on that, and Ben and I had quite a few chats, and I know we were talking about pulling the goalies and making the change, just as you said, not so much on a performance thing taking anything away from Hal. It was more just to make a change. And we went back and forth a couple of times, having a couple of chats. So that was definitely a chat on the sideline between coaches. And then eventually we thought, okay, this is it. We've got to do this now. And we did make the change. The other chat, to answer Kate's question, I think, which I remember, Tom, was yourself and myself talking about keeping Brooksy in at the face once he scored this goal. It was, we had that whole mentality of keeping an eye on who's hot, who's playing, and who's strong, and leave them on the field a little bit longer. And Brooksy, in my opinion, was a hell of a captain, hell of a leader, but I remember him being left at the face-off for the next 3 or 4, I think.
Yeah, you're right. Coaches don't have favourites, but if they did, Tom Brook would be pretty close to the top of the list. Outstanding. There's something that I think with, and then Tom scores. I don't down and he splits about shooting hand, and then everyone's been after a goal scored by long balls. Tom Brook is still on the field. That's a deliberate tactic. So Tom Brook still on the field, sees the ball now, spins it across. What a man! Sam holds his position. Fabulous. The reason that I take particular enjoyment for all of those goals is that we had worked on our shooting before we'd gone. But in light of what I talked about in terms of the mechanics and how you teach, there's plenty of people out there who talk about repetition. I don't buy it. What we had done is we had developed a game. We called it indoor. It was indoors. It was small-sided, 4v4, 5v5, but frequently 6v6. It was a lot like the new Olympic rules that we've come to. Small-sided pitch, and it was just up, down, up, down, up, down, and everybody defending, everybody shooting. And when I watch these goals, I see players making decisions in tight positions. I see people moving the ball to the free man, to the open man. I see them make instinctive decisions and then fit.
Tom, the footage is breaking up a little bit. Can you sort of talk and then run the footage? Let's try running the two separately, because we're either getting the footage but not you, or getting you but not the footage.
Okay. So what I was saying there, Richard, is that has come from, I feel, at least in part, practice environments that we developed back in England and worked on week after week after week. We developed games where players were given the responsibility to take shots, regardless of whether they were poles or short sticks. They were put in positions where they had to make those kind of decisions. And as we'd got, it's certainly before this, certainly before 7-3, it might even have been 7-1, 7-2. Something I remember really clearly from this game, just a bizarre little aside, is that I go out of my way to build relationships with referees. I will never be a coach who shouts at referees, who questions decisions. It's just not kind of one of my personal values, but I absolutely don't see it from a performance point of view. If I've been berating somebody for 79 minutes and then expect them to throw a call my way when it really matters in the 80th minute, I just don't see human nature working that way. I see it the other way. I try and build relationships with officials, and the official in this game was Australian. Obviously, you don't get English officials for England games or Japanese officials. It was Australian, but it was Steve Green. For those of you who remember Steve Green, I think played at Oldham. and gone down to Australia, and he ended up refereeing. And I chatted to him during the game, and that is, like I say, individual moments, and my memory of games is never good, but I remember really clearly telling him, probably about now, but I think maybe 7-2, that he was going to referee one of the greatest comebacks of world lacrosse. And I think I probably did genuinely mean that. Not just a great comeback because of the score of kind of coming back from 7 goals, but a great comeback from just how appalling we were, and how kind of, that we just looked like 2 different teams. Just want to focus on this goal because of what came before. There are Japan are playing a zone at this point, and they had been for quite some time. And we had, as I said before, specifically scouted that, specifically prepared for it, and we had a zone offense. We had an offense that we wanted to play, which we did. Now we got a goal off it. We got a goal off of that one where Zach scores his tiptoes on the crease. So we spot the hole in their zone, really patient, and it's in the end it's a very, very simple goal. Just feed a guy inside and a really nice twister finish. But the next goal by Ryan, they are man on man. So I'll just play that and then talk through it with you. So when I say they're kind of man on man, they're kind of in a little bit of a halfway house there, and I think they're not 100% sure. Some of them are playing man on man, and some of them are playing zone, and that's something that I think the players should take great credit for. If you have a particular kind of philosophy, a particular play, a particular way of breaking down something that you see the opposition are going to do, you may have the direct outcome. So the first time round, we have our zone offense, we get a look, Zach puts it in the goal, happy days. On that one, we don't get a look. But what we force them to do is to make a decision about, do we carry on playing zone or do we not carry on playing zone? And it's that frequently where you see defenses break down. We kind of see it a bit from our own defense in the first half, with some players slightly on the different page from other players, but we start to see it from them here. And I'd like to think it's because of some of the patient play by the attack and the midfield string. They're just making good decisions. I will just play the last couple of goals and kind of how we then managed the game the game out because they're back up by 1 at this point. So that draws us level, and like I say, I don't think that any of us had panicked at any point. I don't think that any of us had really thought anything other, well, let's just play goal at a time. Let's just play goal at a time. And then we get to a period without much in the way of goals at all. And we've got now just under 8 minutes left with the scores tied. I know from having stood on the sideline at 3 World Championships previously, European Championships previously, you feel nervous, you feel worried. Do you think we're going to be able to get over the line? Is this going to happen for us? You start to, your kind of mind plays tricks on you. You extrapolate all sorts of different stuff. I can honestly say where we got to with this team and at this stage, none of that came into my head. It did for previous World Championships. It honestly did. But I had total confidence that we were going to get over the line. It's just what we did. It's what we had done. It had happened before. We'd certainly, I wouldn't say we kind of had enormous momentum here and we're kind of, just riding this wave of absolutely battering them, but we just ground it down, pulled it back 1 goal at a time, 1 goal at a time. And I had nothing in my head other than total confidence. We're going to be fine here. Just watch that finish again in light of the comments I made right at the start of this session and how we coach shooting and how shooting maybe differs from finishing. And if you can get the ball into the goal with a shovel, with a backhand, with a one hand, who gives a monkeys as long as it goes in the goal? So, Baggy, Sam, last goal that we score is with 3 minutes to go, and that takes us 2 goals up. Thought processes now. How does game management differ? How do players respond differently? What's going on from your point of view? First of all, Baggy, with 1-2 goals up with 2 minutes left to play. What are you thinking of from your perspective, managing the bench?
So, again, I think I'm on the same confident plane as you, but I think also we shouldn't take away from the fact that we ended practices with situation lacrosse. We practiced so much with the England team. Situation lacrosse was a big element for us where we were like, okay, we were a goal down with 2 minutes to go, or we're two goals up with 2 minutes to go. And we practiced situations like that time and time again, which is where I think an element of our confidence came from. We've been here. We know what we're doing.
Yeah. And then done that in other games as well, hadn't we? Other games. That yeah. And from your point of view, Sam, your role is a very specific and interesting one, I think, from a men's lacrosse point of view. That you're off and on as a long stick midfielder. How are you feeling once you've got to this stage of the game? What's your thought processes?
Well, as a team, every possession's got to count. So especially on defence, I can remember them having the ball at some point towards the last couple of minutes of the game. I think it might have been a turnover potentially. Individually, you just want to do your job. But I think if you go individual in these games, these crucial moments, then that's when mistakes will happen. But I think we managed the game really well. We saw, the other thing is you can play slow ball and you can play keep ball, and the referees can't get it and keep it in. Then, you putting other challenges upon yourselves there. So I think we managed our possessions really well. Every possession that we had, I think we played with some. We didn't just throw the ball around the perimeter. Let's play circle offense. I think we continue playing our offensive systems, but if it wasn't a high percentage look, we weren't taking it. And I think that's why I think we saw that the end of that game out.
Thank you. And there we go. And the rest of that game, it's interesting watching. I mean, I know, Richard, you were keen to kind of make this an hour, so there's no point us watching the last three minutes, which is, as Sam rightly points out, not particularly us kind of running the ball into a corner and just hiding. It's us trying to play a bit of lacrosse and at times a little bit of backwards and forwards, but just doing a really grand job of shutting them out. And having been 7-0 at quarter time and then 8-5 down at half time, we win the second half 6-1 and obviously from being 7-0 down, bring it back to an 11-9 win. But in and of itself, I think that far more significant is everything that had gone before to put us in a position where we were capable of doing that, and also, as importantly, believed that we were capable of doing that, and didn't get to 7-0 down, crumble and end up losing 18-3, which is entirely plausible and possible, but just a case of pulling it back. And I'm, I have my own views around motivation of players and what gets people up for games. I do think that coaches have a significant role to play in that, but I don't necessarily, well, put it this way, I think if the players need a rocket up the backside, if they need Churchillian speeches and so on in order to perform, then you've got the wrong players. And I don't think we had the wrong players. I think we had players who had mental strength, grit, resilience, a belief in each other and a belief in themselves, and really importantly, had been in the positions before that facilitated this kind of comeback. So that's kind of final thoughts from me, really. Is there anything, Baggy, Sam, that we haven't covered that you think could be worth throwing in at this stage?
I think one of the things that's definitely apparent is the fact that that's the biggest lesson from coaching, is that you just got to have the ability to recognize a situation during a game and be able to change and be able, as a player or a coach, to be able to adapt and change the game plan or change the plan there and then, and not deliberate on it and think about it. You've just got to make the change as soon as you've identified something. And that's a big thing. The other thing that has stood out to me just from watching these goals, as much as the clip has been pretty staggered, is the way that they celebrated. This goal is the same as they celebrated when they were 7-1 down, and that says a lot about the team.
And from you, Sam?
Yeah, I think especially in the championships, world championships, you're with a group of players for 4 years, and it's, whether people think it or not, like the last game of that tournament is a really emotional experience for players, whether they got that bravado or not. For us, it's nearly probably 1 o'clock in the morning here, and we're probably this last game we've ever played, and one of the things that we weren't doing as a group of players was leaving that field without at least attaining some sort of potential that we could have achieved, which hopefully we proved that in some of the games that we did play where we came from behind like we did in this game. So from my point of view, it's a hugely positive experience, and I just remember it was that this team being a really close group of players.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thanks, Baggy, and thanks to everyone for dialing in. Apologies for the kind of the quality of it. I'm not sure what the answer is there, Richard, in terms of our collective bandwidths or how we manage that going forwards. But hopefully, it's at least given people a bit of an insight into some of the elements that go into producing a comeback win at a World Championships, and very happy to answer any specific questions, cover any particular points that people might have.
Does anybody actually have any questions?
Chris has got his Chris Dale's got his hand up.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, I think one of the things that hasn't necessarily come across Tom, and particularly Sam, is how many games you actually played to get to this position. I mean, I can remember playing 5 or 6 games over 7 days, but I mean, you had 8 or 9 games. I don't know whether, Tom, you remember, I sent you a text message and said, "Oh, congratulations," and you text me back and said, "I've still got another game to go." I don't know whether you remember that.
No,
so
my
question to Sam is, how tired was everybody, and how was the squad generally feeling with that amount of games in so few days?
I think this was our 11th game since we touched down in Israel. So including the warm games, I think one of the things that obviously has improved over the course of the years is sports science. And I think prior to this, we a lot of emphasis was put on horrible 30-30 and 15-15 runs that we were putting in both as a team on every Wednesday or Thursday when we had our weekly training sessions, and then obviously on our own time. So I think conditioning wise, we were in pretty good nick. I think we all said this. So I from my point of view, I was the oldest on the team. I didn't feel tired personally. I think mentally you feel tired, and that's the key thing. One of the key challenges in a World Championships is managing the mental, your emotional sort of tiredness, if you will, but also sleep. You think you might have 24 hours in between games. You don't. You probably maximum have 16, maybe even 12 in between games. So there's a really short turnaround that you have to manage both from nutritionally and sleep and recovery and all that kind of thing. It's a massive endurance event.
I also think, just to, I'm sure you'll back me up on this, Sam, is that the 2 unsung heroes as well, Manzu and Duncan, who were the physio and the trainer, did an amazing job to get the team through. And their door was always open for sports massage and for therapy and for treatment. So we were blessed to have guys like that on the backroom staff.
Thank you.
I think
Do we have any more questions? Okay, well, I'd like to basically thank Barry, Tom, and Sam for finding the time. Sam, you've got a question, or?
That was an accident.
All right, and I'd like to actually thank everybody for taking the time to join. We do hope to run sort of these on a certainly monthly basis, a minimum, and we're looking at sort of different subjects that we hope will engage people and keep people interested. If anybody has any sort of specific things that they would like to subjects they'd like us to sort of look to cover, please feel free to contact me or contact England Lacrosse, and we will more than happy to look at a different option of things. And again, apologise for the quality of video. Like I say, it has been extensively tested, but you're never sure of your broadband width until you get 40 people on a call. So again, apologies for that. I have put a link in the chat to all the goals in YouTube. And again, we have recorded the session. What I'll actually do is pass this over to our comms team and see whether they can clean up the footage for the recording that's in there, and we'll provide a link to everybody so we can put a bit of context to it. So again, like I say, thank you for everybody involved, and thanks for taking the time to do it. And again, once again, thanks to Tom, to Sam, and to Baggy for taking the time to put it together.
Pleasure. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everyone.
Good to relive it.